The morning sun cast long shadows across the mess hall as Sarah Martinez wiped down the coffee station for the third time. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory from 18 months of the same routine. Pour, serve, smile, repeat. The naval base's dining facility buzzed with the usual chatter of sailors grabbing breakfast before their shifts began. Sarah had never imagined this would be her life. 2 years ago, she was Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, call sign Phoenix, flying FA-18 Super Hornets off the deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford. She had been one of only 12 female fighter pilots in her squadron, earning respect through countless hours of training and flawless execution in high-pressure situations. Her call sign came from her ability to recover from seemingly impossible situations during training exercises, always rising from what looked like certain failure. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning over the Mediterranean. During a routine patrol mission, a mechanical failure in her aircraft's hydraulic system left her with limited control. The carrier was too far for a safe landing, and the nearest friendly airfield was experiencing severe weather. Sarah managed to nurse her crippled aircraft to an emergency landing at a small NATO base, saving both the multi-million-dollar fighter and her own life. The incident should have been a testament to her skill and composure under pressure. Instead, it became the beginning of her nightmare. The investigation that followed was supposed to be routine. Sarah had followed protocol perfectly, made all the right decisions, and brought home both herself and the aircraft when lesser pilots might have ejected and lost the plane. But Lieutenant Commander Bradley Hayes, the investigating officer, had other ideas. Hayes had made his disapproval of women in combat roles clear on multiple occasions, though always careful to keep his opinions just within the bounds of military regulation. Hayes twisted every detail of the incident report. He questioned Sarah's decision-making, suggested she had panicked, and implied that a more experienced pilot would have handled the situation differently. He cited minor variations in her pre-flight checks and painted them as negligence. When Sarah's squadron mates tried to speak up in her defense, Hayes made it clear that their careers could suffer similar scrutiny. The final report recommended Sarah be grounded pending additional training and psychological evaluation. The recommendation wasn't quite a court-martial, but it was career suicide. In the rigid hierarchy of naval aviation, such a mark on her record meant she would never fly combat missions again. Her dreams of becoming a test pilot or squadron commander evaporated overnight. Sarah had two choices: fight the report through official channels, which could take years and likely result in the same outcome, or accept a transfer to non-flight duties. Her lawyer, provided by the Navy, was pessimistic about their chances. Hayes had covered his tracks well, and the military's old boys network was still strong enough to protect one of their own. With a heavy heart, Sarah chose the transfer. She couldn't bear the thought of years of legal battles, watching her reputation get dragged through the mud while Hayes continued his rise through the ranks. She requested assignment to Naval Station Norfolk, where she could at least be close to her aging parents in Virginia. The transition from the cockpit to the mess hall had been brutal. Sarah went from commanding a machine worth $60 million to serving coffee and clearing tables. Her fellow service members treated her with a mixture of pity and confusion. Some knew her story and offered quiet words of support. Others simply saw another enlisted sailor who couldn't cut it in the real Navy. The hardest part wasn't the work itself, though scrubbing dishes and mopping floors was a far cry from aerial combat maneuvers. The hardest part was watching other pilots come through the mess hall, their flight suits crisp and their conversations full of the technical details she missed so desperately. They talked about sorties and training exercises, about new weapon systems and tactical innovations. Sarah listened from behind the coffee counter, her heart aching with every word. Her parents tried to be supportive, but they didn't understand why she didn't just leave the military altogether. "You have a degree in aerospace engineering," her mother would say during their weekly phone calls. "You could work for Boeing or Lockheed. Why stay where they don't appreciate you? Sarah couldn't explain that despite everything, the Navy was still her home. She had dreamed of military service since she was 8 years old, watching Blue Angels performances at air shows. The betrayal she had suffered was devastating, but walking away completely felt like letting Hayes win. So she stayed, serving coffee and cleaning tables, hoping that somehow, someday, she might find a way back to the sky. The mess hall assignment came with one small mercy. She worked the morning shift, which meant she was usually off duty by early afternoon. Sarah spent those free hours at the base library, reading technical manuals and keeping up with developments in naval aviation. She maintained her flight certifications through civilian programs, paying out of her own pocket for the required training hours. Her fellow sailors thought she was crazy, but Sarah refused to let her skills atrophy completely. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, meanwhile, had been promoted to full commander and transferred to the Pentagon. Sarah heard through the grapevine that he was being considered for his own squadron command. The injustice burned in her chest every time she thought about it, but she had learned to channel that anger into determination. She would not be broken by one man's prejudice and corruption. On this particular morning, as Sarah refilled the coffee dispensers and arranged fresh pastries, she noticed an unusual buzz of activity in the mess hall. Senior officers were arriving earlier than usual, and there seemed to be more dress uniforms than typical for a Tuesday. She overheard fragments of conversation about an important visitor, someone from Pacific Fleet headquarters. Sarah paid little attention to the speculation. High-ranking visitors came through Norfolk regularly, and it rarely affected the daily routine of mess hall operations. She focused on her work, making sure everything was perfect for the breakfast rush. Whatever dignitary was visiting would likely be eating in the officers' club anyway, not in the enlisted mess. As the morning progressed, the crowd in the mess hall grew larger and more diverse than usual. Sarah noticed sailors from departments she rarely saw, along with several officers she recognized from base administration. The conversation was louder than normal, with an undercurrent of excitement that suggested something significant was happening. Around 9:30, just as Sarah was preparing to start the cleanup for the lunch shift changeover, a group of senior officers entered the mess hall. She glanced up from the coffee station and felt her breath catch. Leading the group was a woman in dress blues with enough ribbons and insignia to command respect from anyone in uniform. Admiral Rebecca Chen was a legend in naval aviation. She had been one of the first women to fly combat missions in Iraq, had commanded 2 different carrier air wings, and was currently serving as deputy commander of Pacific Fleet. Sarah had studied Admiral Chen's career during her time at the Naval Academy, using her as inspiration during the difficult early years of flight training. The Admiral moved through the mess hall with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in any environment. She stopped at several tables, talking with enlisted sailors and junior officers with the same attention and respect. Sarah watched from behind the coffee station, marveling at how Chen seemed to remember names and ask about specific assignments or family members. As Admiral Chen made her way around the room, Sarah became increasingly nervous. There was something deliberate about the Admiral's movements, as if she was looking for someone specific. When Chen's eyes met hers across the room, Sarah felt a jolt of recognition that she couldn't quite explain. The Admiral continued her rounds for another 10 minutes, but Sarah could feel her attention returning periodically to the coffee station. Finally, Admiral Chen approached the counter where Sarah was standing, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. "Good morning," Admiral Chen said with a warm smile. "I don't believe we've met, but I've heard quite a bit about you." Sarah's mind raced, trying to figure out what the Admiral could possibly know about a mess hall worker. She managed to stammer out a greeting and asked if she could get the Admiral some coffee. "That would be wonderful, thank you," Chen replied. As Sarah reached for the coffee pot, the Admiral leaned slightly closer to the counter. "Tell me, do you miss flying, Phoenix?" The coffee pot slipped from Sarah's suddenly nerveless fingers. The sound of shattering ceramic echoed through the sudden silence that had fallen over the mess hall. Sarah stared at the broken coffee pot at her feet, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Admiral Chen had spoken her call sign, her old call sign that should have been buried along with her flying career. "Easy there," Admiral Chen said gently, stepping around the counter to help Sarah clean up the mess. The simple gesture of a three-star admiral helping an enlisted sailor pick up broken pottery sent a ripple of shock through the watching crowd. Sometimes the past has a way of catching up with us when we least expect it. Sarah's hands trembled as she gathered the larger pieces. "Ma'am, I don't understand. How do you know about Phoenix? That was years ago, and I'm not supposed to—" "Not supposed to what?" Admiral Chen asked, her voice carrying just enough authority to cut through Sarah's panic. "Not supposed to be one of the finest pilots I've ever seen? Not supposed to have saved a $60 million aircraft through skill and courage that would have made any squadron commander proud?" The mess hall had gone completely quiet now. Sailors at nearby tables had stopped eating, their attention fixed on the extraordinary scene playing out at the coffee station. Sarah felt dozens of eyes watching her, and the familiar weight of being the center of unwanted attention settled on her shoulders. Admiral Chen seemed to notice the crowd for the first time. She looked around the room with the kind of expression that could make senior officers reconsider their life choices, then turned back to Sarah. "Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" "I'm on duty, ma'am. I can't just leave my station." "I think I can arrange for someone to cover your responsibilities," Chen said with a slight smile. She gestured to a nervous-looking lieutenant who had been hovering nearby. "Mr. Patterson, would you mind ensuring the coffee station is properly maintained while I borrow Petty Officer Martinez for a few minutes?" Lieutenant Patterson looked like he wanted to object, then caught sight of Admiral Chen's rank insignia and nodded quickly. "Of course, ma'am. No problem at all." Admiral Chen led Sarah toward a small conference room adjacent to the mess hall. As they walked, Sarah caught fragments of whispered conversations behind them. She heard her old call sign repeated several times, mixed with speculation about what was happening. By evening, she knew, the entire base would be buzzing with stories about the mess hall worker who somehow warranted personal attention from a Pacific Fleet admiral. The conference room was simple and functional, with a small table surrounded by metal chairs. Admiral Chen closed the door behind them and gestured for Sarah to sit. Instead of taking the chair across from her, Chen sat beside Sarah, eliminating the formal distance that rank usually required. "I know you have questions," Admiral Chen began, "and I promise to answer them. But first, I need you to answer one for me. Why are you still here?" Sarah blinked in confusion. "Ma'am? You're a brilliant pilot who got railroaded by a corrupt officer. You have an engineering degree and skills that any aerospace company would value highly. You could have left the Navy, started fresh somewhere else, and probably been flying again within a year. So why are you still here, serving coffee to people who should be saluting your achievements?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. It was the same question her parents asked. The same question she asked herself during the long, sleepless nights when the injustice burned brightest. She had never found a good answer, at least not one that made sense to anyone else. "Because this is who I am," Sarah said finally. "The Navy isn't just what I do, it's who I've been since I was 18 years old. Commander Hayes took my wings, but he couldn't take away the fact that I'm still a sailor. Leaving would have felt like admitting he was right, that I didn't belong here." Admiral Chen nodded slowly. "I thought that might be your answer. It's the same reason I stayed when people told me women would never command carrier air wings. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones we fight just by refusing to surrender the ground we've already won." Sarah felt tears threatening and fought them back. She had spent 2 years building walls around the pain of losing her flying career, and Admiral Chen's words were threatening to tear them down. "Ma'am, With respect, I haven't won anything. I'm serving coffee while Hayes is probably picking out curtains for his new squadron commander's office. About Commander Hayes, Admiral Chen said, her tone becoming noticeably cooler. I assume you know he was promoted and transferred to the Pentagon? Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. What you probably don't know is that his promotion came with some interesting new responsibilities. He's been placed in charge of reviewing historical disciplinary cases for evidence of bias or procedural violations. Funny thing about giving someone that job, it tends to attract attention to their own past decisions. Sarah's heart began to race. Ma'am, are you saying... I'm saying that sometimes justice takes longer than we'd like, but it has a way of finding its target eventually. Hayes's investigation of your incident was reviewed by a board of senior officers 6 months ago. The conclusion was unanimous. Gross procedural violations, clear evidence of gender bias, and a recommendation for immediate corrective action. The room seemed to spin around Sarah. For 2 years, she had convinced herself that Hayes had won completely, that her flying career was permanently over. The possibility that the investigation might be overturned had never seriously occurred to her. The review board recommended that you be immediately reinstated to full flight status with a formal apology and back pay for the period you were inappropriately grounded. There's just one small problem. Sarah's heart sank. Of course there was a problem. Nothing in her military career had ever been straightforward. The problem is that your original squadron has been deployed to the Pacific, and there aren't any immediate openings in East Coast fighter units that would be appropriate for someone with your experience level. Which brings me to why I'm here. Admiral Chen reached into her briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. I'm forming a new unit, a special project that will be based out of Naval Air Station Oceana. We're developing new tactics and technologies for carrier-based operations, working directly with test pilots and aerospace engineers. The work is challenging, sometimes dangerous, and absolutely critical to the future of naval aviation. She slid the folder across the table to Sarah. The unit needs a pilot with exceptional skills and the kind of resilience that comes from overcoming significant adversity. Someone who understands both the technical and human sides of military aviation. Someone with the call sign Phoenix. Sarah opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside was a set of transfer orders, signed and dated, along with a flight qualification checklist and a squadron patch she didn't recognize. The patch showed a phoenix rising from flames, with the words, Special Project Squadron, curved around the edge. I don't understand, Sarah whispered. Why me? There have to be dozens of pilots with better records, people who haven't been grounded for 2 years. There are, Admiral Chen agreed, but none of them have proven they can handle failure and keep fighting. None of them have shown the character to stay loyal to an institution that failed them, and none of them have the particular combination of technical knowledge and operational experience that this mission requires. Sarah stared at the transfer orders, afraid to believe what she was seeing. What about my current assignment? The mess hall duties? Consider yourself permanently transferred as of today. Your replacement has already been briefed and will take over tomorrow morning. You have 1 week to complete your flight requalification training. Then you report to Oceana for orientation. The weight of 2 years of suppressed hope and anger crashed down on Sarah all at once. She had imagined this moment countless times, but it had always been fantasy, a daydream to get through another day of serving coffee and mopping floors. The reality was overwhelming. Ma'am, I need to ask, Commander Hayes, what happened to him? Admiral Chen's expression hardened slightly. Commander Hayes is currently under investigation by the Inspector General's office for a pattern of discriminatory behavior spanning his entire career. It turns out your case wasn't the only one. 3 other female officers have come forward with similar stories, and there are indications of additional victims who haven't spoken up yet. Sarah felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. She was glad that Hayes was finally facing consequences, but the knowledge that other women had suffered similar treatment was heartbreaking. "The Navy is changing," Admiral Chen continued. "Slowly, sometimes painfully, but it's changing. People like Hayes represent the old guard, officers who see diversity as a threat rather than a strength. Our job is to prove them wrong, not by fighting their battles, but by being so good at what we do that their opinions become irrelevant." Admiral Chen stood and extended her hand. "So, Lieutenant Martinez, are you ready to fly again?" Sarah took the Admiral's hand, feeling like she was grasping a lifeline. "Yes, ma'am. More than ready." "Good. Because tomorrow morning, when word gets out about what happened here today, you're going to face a lot of attention. Some of it positive, some of it negative. The important thing to remember is that you earned this opportunity through your skill and character, not as some kind of diversity gesture. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." As they walked back toward the mess hall, Sarah felt like she was moving through a dream. The future that had seemed impossible just an hour ago was suddenly real and tangible. But she also knew that Admiral Chen was right about the attention. Her story would spread through the naval aviation community like wildfire, and not everyone would be happy about her return to flight status. The mess hall was still buzzing with conversation when they emerged from the conference room. Lieutenant Patterson looked relieved to see them return, clearly uncomfortable with his temporary coffee station duties. Sarah noticed that several sailors quickly looked away when she met their eyes, confirming her suspicion that her conversation with Admiral Chen had been the subject of intense speculation. Admiral Chen paused at the coffee station and turned to address the room. Her voice carried the kind of natural authority that immediately commanded attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to take a moment to remind you of something important. The Navy's greatest strength has always been its people, and sometimes those people face challenges that test their dedication and resolve. What matters isn't whether someone falls down, it's whether they get back up and keep fighting for what they believe in." She looked directly at Sarah. "Lieutenant Martinez here is an example of that kind of dedication. She's proven that setbacks don't define us, and that true service means staying committed to something bigger than ourselves, even when that commitment is difficult." The Admiral's words sent a clear message to everyone in the room. Sarah's story was one of perseverance and ultimate vindication, not failure or charity. It was exactly the kind of leadership Sarah had always admired about Admiral Chen. As Admiral Chen prepared to leave, she turned back to Sarah one final time. "I'll see you at Oceana next week, Phoenix. Try not to break anything else before then." For the first time in 2 years, Sarah Martinez smiled with genuine happiness. 6 months later, Lieutenant Sarah Martinez pulled her FA-18F Super Hornet into a steep climb, the Virginia coastline shrinking below her as she headed toward the test area. The familiar weight of G-forces pressed against her body, but instead of fighting the sensation, she welcomed it like an old friend. Every flight still felt like a miracle, a gift she had never expected to receive again. The Special Projects Squadron had exceeded every expectation she'd had when Admiral Chen first handed her those transfer orders. Based at Naval Air Station Oceana, the unit was developing revolutionary tactics for future carrier operations, including experimental formations and advanced electronic warfare techniques. Sarah found herself working alongside test pilots, aerospace engineers, and some of the most innovative minds in naval aviation. Her call sign had followed her to the new squadron, but now it carried different meaning. The other pilots didn't see Phoenix as a reminder of past failure, but as a symbol of resilience and renewal. Commander Lisa Park, the squadron's commanding officer, had made it clear from day one that Sarah's experience with adversity was considered an asset, not a liability. "Phoenix, this is Tower," the radio crackled in her headset. "You're cleared for test pattern Delta 7. Weather is clear, sea state calm, good hunting." "Roger, Tower. Phoenix beginning test run." Today's mission involved evaluating a new communication system designed to operate in high-interference environments. Sarah's job was to push the equipment to its limits, testing how well it functioned under various types of electronic jamming while maintaining formation, flying with 2 other aircraft. As she approached the designated test area, Sarah's thoughts drifted to the remarkable changes in her life over the past months. The return to flying had been everything she'd hoped for and more, but the real transformation had been in her relationship with the Navy itself. She no longer felt like an outsider fighting for acceptance. Instead, she was part of a team working toward something important. The integration back into naval aviation hadn't been without challenges. Word of her reinstatement had spread through the community quickly, generating a mix of reactions. Some older officers viewed her return with suspicion, wondering if political correctness had triumphed over merit. Others, particularly younger aviators and women throughout the service, saw her story as proof that the system could eventually correct its mistakes. Sarah had learned to ignore the whispers and focus on her performance. Admiral Chen's advice proved invaluable during those early weeks. Let the flying do the talking. Sarah threw herself into every training exercise and test mission with the determination of someone who knew how precious this second chance was. "Phoenix, this is Viper," came the voice of her wingman, Lieutenant Jake Rodriguez. "Beginning jamming sequence in 30 seconds. Copy, Viper. Phoenix ready." The communication test was more complex than typical training exercises. Sarah had to maintain precise formation while dealing with various types of electronic interference, simulating the kind of hostile environment they might encounter in real combat operations. The new system was designed to automatically switch frequencies and adjust power levels to maintain contact even under heavy jamming. As the interference began, Sarah's radio filled with static and competing signals. The new communication system immediately began adapting, searching for clear channels and adjusting its transmission parameters. Through her headphones, she could hear the system's artificial intelligence making rapid calculations and decisions. "Phoenix, can you... This is Viper. Signal strength." The fragmented transmissions reminded Sarah of her emergency landing 2 years ago, when equipment failures had forced her to rely on backup systems and instinct. But this time she was testing equipment that might prevent other pilots from facing similar situations. The work felt meaningful in a way that went beyond personal redemption. As the test progressed, Sarah found herself thinking about Commander Hayes and the investigation that had finally brought his career to an end. 3 months after Admiral Chen's visit to the mess hall, Hayes had been court-martialed on charges of conduct unbecoming an officer and discrimination. The proceedings had revealed a pattern of behavior spanning his entire career, affecting not just female officers, but also minorities and junior personnel who had challenged his authority. Sarah had been called to testify during the court-martial. Walking into that courtroom had been one of the most difficult things she'd ever done, harder in some ways than landing a crippled aircraft. But seeing Hayes sitting at the defendant's table, his career and reputation in ruins, had provided a sense of closure she hadn't expected. The judge had been particularly harsh in his sentencing remarks, noting that Hayes had betrayed the trust placed in him as an officer and had damaged the careers of promising service members. Hayes was dismissed from the Navy with loss of all benefits and privileges. The man who had tried to end Sarah's flying career was now working as a security guard at a civilian airport, his military pension gone along with his rank and reputation. "Phoenix, this is Tower," the radio crackled as the communication system found a clear channel. "How's the new equipment performing?" "Tower, Phoenix. System is adapting well to interference, switching frequencies automatically and maintaining clear communication throughout the jamming sequence." The successful test was another step forward for the squadron's mission, but for Sarah it represented something more personal. Every successful flight, every positive evaluation, every moment she spent doing the job she loved was a victory over the forces that had tried to ground her permanently. After landing, Sarah joined her squadron mates in the debriefing room. Commander Park led them through a detailed analysis of the test results, highlighting both successes and areas for improvement. The atmosphere was professional but relaxed, with the kind of easy camaraderie that Sarah had missed during her years behind the coffee station. "Outstanding work today," Commander Park concluded. "Phoenix, your handling of the formation flying under jamming conditions was textbook. The engineers will be pleased with the data we collected." As the other pilots filed out of the debriefing room, Commander Park asked Sarah to stay behind. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, worried that something had gone wrong with the test that she hadn't noticed. "Relax," Commander Park said, noticing Sarah's expression. "You're not in trouble. Quite the opposite, actually." The commander pulled out a sealed envelope bearing the official seal of Pacific Fleet Headquarters. "This came through official channels this morning. Admiral Chen wanted me to give it to you personally." Sarah opened the envelope with curiosity, wondering what Admiral Chen might want to communicate that couldn't go through normal Navy communication channels. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Admiral Chen's personal letterhead. "Lieutenant Martinez," the letter began, "I hope this finds you well and that your return to flying has been everything you hoped it would be. I wanted to personally inform you of an opportunity that I believe would interest you." Sarah's hands began to shake as she read the rest of the letter. Admiral Chen was being promoted to full admiral and assigned as commander of the entire Pacific Fleet. She was assembling a personal staff of exceptional officers to help lead the Navy into a new era of innovation and inclusivity. She wanted Sarah to join that staff as her aide-de-camp for aviation matters. "It's an incredible opportunity," Commander Park said, having clearly already been briefed on the contents. "Working directly for Admiral Chen would put you at the center of naval aviation policy and planning. You'd have influence over decisions that affect thousands of pilots and aircrew." Sarah stared at the letter, trying to process the magnitude of what was being offered. 2 years ago, she had been serving coffee and wondering if her military career was over. Now she was being invited to work at the highest levels of naval leadership. "There's no pressure to accept," Commander Park continued. "Admiral Chen made it clear that you've earned the right to choose your own path. If you want to stay with the squadron and focus on flying, she'll respect that decision completely." Sarah thought about Admiral Chen's words from their first meeting. "Sometimes the most important battles are the ones we fight just by refusing to surrender the ground we've already won." By staying in the Navy and fighting her way back to flying status, Sarah had won more than just personal vindication. She had proven that the system could change, that talent and determination could overcome prejudice and corruption. Now she faced a new choice: continue flying, which had always been her first love, or accept a position where she could help ensure that other talented officers wouldn't face the same obstacles she had encountered. "I need some time to think about it," Sarah said finally. "Of course. Admiral Chen doesn't need an answer for 2 weeks. That evening, Sarah drove to the beach near the base and walked along the shore as the sun set over the Chesapeake Bay. She thought about her journey from the cockpit to the coffee station and back again, about the people who had supported her and those who had tried to break her. She thought about the young female aviators coming up through the ranks, the ones who would face their own challenges and setbacks. She thought about Admiral Chen's vision of a Navy, where merit mattered more than prejudice, where diversity was seen as strength rather than threat. As the stars began to appear overhead, Sarah made her decision. She would accept Admiral Chen's offer, not because she was tired of flying, but because she had found something even more important than personal achievement. She had found a mission that was bigger than herself. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in Admiral Chen's new office at Pacific Fleet Headquarters in Hawaii, wearing the gold stripes of a newly promoted lieutenant commander. Her promotion had come through simultaneously with her transfer, recognition of both her flying skills and her potential for leadership. "Ready for the next challenge, Phoenix?" Admiral Chen asked. Sarah looked out the window at Pearl Harbor, where the same ships and aircraft that had inspired her childhood dreams of naval service rode at anchor. But now she saw them differently. Not just as symbols of military power, but as tools for building a better future. "More than ready, ma'am." Admiral Chen smiled and handed her a briefing folder marked Top Secret. "Good, because we have a lot of work to do." As Sarah opened the folder and began reading about the Admiral's plans for transforming naval aviation, she realized that her story wasn't really about falling down and getting back up. It was about discovering that sometimes our greatest failures prepare us for our most important successes. Outside the office window, a formation of FA-18s took off from the nearby airfield, climbing into the Pacific sky. Sarah watched them disappear into the distance, knowing that somewhere among those pilots might be the next officer who would need someone to believe in them when the system failed. She was ready to be that someone.